My sister grabbed my daughter by the hair and called her trash. Now I'm marrying the lawyer who took her children's future away. My name is Rachel, and I am a 34-year-old single mother with two wonderful children, Sophie, 8, and Eli, 6. For years, I've been the family's scapegoat, while my older sister, Natalia, has been the favored child. But what happened last month altered everything, and I finally received the vengeance I never knew I wanted. Let me start at the beginning. Growing up, Natalia was always my favorite. She was 3 years older, had perfect grades, married her high school boyfriend Brian immediately after graduation, and gave my parents their first grandchildren, twins named Ava and Caleb, who are now 10 years old. Meanwhile, I struggled through college, worked many jobs, and ended up having Sophie and Eli with my ex-boyfriend, Jake, who vanished as soon as he discovered I was pregnant with Eli. My parents, Linda and Richard, never forgot how dissatisfied they were with my decisions. Every family meeting became a comparison session, with Natalia's accomplishments highlighted and my troubles discounted. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became their favorite saying. Despite this, I worked tirelessly to provide for my children, eventually getting a good position as a medical assistant at a local clinic. The age difference between our children was not planned. Natalia had twins after graduating from college at the age of 27, whereas I waited until I was more financially solid. Sophie arrived when I was 26 and Eli when I was 28. Natalia was always quick to point out that her children were more advanced merely because they were older, cleverly neglecting the fact that a 2-year age difference mattered nothing in the end. The college fund revelation occurred during our weekly family meal at my parents' residence. We were all seated around their huge dining room table, which Natalia had pushed them to purchase because it was better suited for family gatherings. My children were playing nicely in the living room, while Natalia's twins ran around screaming uncontrollably, as they always do. I observed that my father's new security system had cameras in the main places. He had installed them following a break-in in their area a few months prior. The cameras were obvious, situated in the corners of the major rooms, and I didn't think much of them at the time. "Linda and I have made a decision," my father explained, clearing his throat. "Importantly, we've decided to set up college funds for all the grandchildren. We'll contribute $50,000 for each child." My heart skipped a beat. Sophie and Eli ended up with a total of $100,000 because they each received $50,000. This might alter their entire future. For the first time in years, I felt as if my parents were genuinely concerned about my children's welfare. Natalia responded, "That's wonderful, Dad." But I could see the wheels moving in her thoughts. "How generous of you both. We want to make sure that all of our grandchildren have the opportunities that we never had," Mom said, beaming lovingly. "Education is so important." I was about to thank them when Natalia's expression changed. She laid down her wine glass and leaned forward with that calculating expression I recognized all too well. "Actually, Mom, Dad, I've been thinking," she began, her voice putting on that lovely, deceptive tone she'd honed over the years. "Ava and Caleb are going to need extra money for their advanced programs. Ava's already showing signs of being gifted, and Caleb's going to need specialized tutoring for his learning differences." I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought, here it comes. My kids need the money for their future goals, and they deserve some vacation as well. Her brats can figure it out themselves, Natalia added, dismissively nodding at me. I mean, let's be realistic here. Sophie and Eli aren't exactly honor roll material, and Rachel's never been good at planning ahead anyway. The room went silent. I looked at my sister in bewilderment. Did she actually call my kids brats and demand college money? "Excuse me?" I said, scarcely audible. "You heard me," Natalia replied without looking at me. "Mom, Dad, you know I'm right. My children have potential. They're going places. Rachel's kids, well, they're sweet, but let's not pretend they're going to Harvard." That was when I snapped. "Are you seriously asking our parents to take money away from my children to give to yours? Your husband makes 6 figures, Natalia. You live in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. My kids and I are crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment." Natalia rolled her eyes. "That's not my problem. Maybe if you'd made better choices, you wouldn't be in this situation." "Better choices?" I stood up, my chair slapping against the floor. You mean like not having children with a man who abandoned us? Like working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads? Like sacrificing everything for their well-being? Exactly, Natalia replied coldly. You made your bed. Now lie in it. I turned to my parents, expecting them to interfere and tell Natalia she was being ridiculous. Instead, I noticed them exchanging glances. Natalia does have a point, Mom remarked softly. Her children are academically gifted and they're going to need more resources. Are you kidding me right now? I could feel tears welling up behind my eyelids. You're actually considering this? Now, Rachel, Dad began in that patronizing tone he'd used all my life. Let's think about this practically. Natalia's children have a better chance of actually using a college education effectively. My children are smart, I protested. Sophie's teacher says she's reading above grade level, and Eli is amazing at math. Just because they're not in your precious gifted programs doesn't mean they don't deserve the same opportunities. Natalia laughed. Actually, I laughed. Rachel, honey, you're being emotional. This is about being practical. My kids are going to make something of themselves. Your kids. Well, they're probably going to end up just like you. The insult struck me like a physical blow. I looked around the table at my family, my parents nodding in agreement, Natalia smirking with glee, and Brian simply sitting there like the spineless coward he had always been. I can't believe you're all okay with this, I exclaimed, my voice quivering. These are your grandchildren we're talking about. Sophie and Eli are part of this family too. Of course they are, Mom replied in her false nice voice. We're not saying they can't have college funds. We're just saying it makes more sense to invest more heavily in the children who are more likely to succeed. So you're going to give Natalia's kids more money because you've already decided my kids are failures? I virtually yelled now. They are 8 and 6 years old. Rachel, calm down, Dad said severely. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? I'm making a scene because I'm defending my children's right to equal treatment from their own grandparents? Natalia sprang up, her cheeks flushed from fury. You know what, Rachel? I'm tired of this. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to take opportunities away from my children because you can't handle the fact that they're better than yours. Better than mine? I asked incredulously. Your kids are spoiled brats who think the world owes them everything. At least my children understand the value of hard work and respect. How dare you? Natalia screamed. My children are perfect. They're going to be doctors and lawyers and actually contribute to society, unlike your little welfare babies. That's enough, I exclaimed back. Don't you dare talk about my children like that. But Natalia was only getting started. Face it, Rachel. You're a failure as a mother and a failure as a person. Your kids are going to grow up to be just like you, broke, bitter, and blaming everyone else for their problems. I felt a snap inside me. I lunged at Natalia, prepared to defend my children with everything I had. But before I could approach her, my father grabbed my arm. That's it, he remarked, his tone hard and definitive. You need to leave now. What? I glanced at him, stunned. I need to leave? She's the one who… You're being aggressive and inappropriate, Mom said, rising to stand by Natalia. We won't tolerate this behavior in our home. I stared in terror as my parents began gathering my possessions, including my pocketbook, jacket, and Sophie's backpack. They actually kicked me out. After everything Natalia had said, and the way she had insulted my children, they had taken her side. You can't be serious, I replied. But even as I spoke, I knew I was serious. Mommy? Sophie asked, her face puzzled and terrified. Why is everyone yelling? Eli was immediately behind her, holding his beloved stuffed dinosaur. Are we going home now? The sight of my children's terrified expressions broke my heart. They should not have to see this. They shouldn't have to participate in this harmful family dynamic. Yes, baby, I replied, trying to remain cool. We're going home now. But Natalia was not done. She marched over to Sophie and grabbed her by the hair. In fact, she grabbed my 8-year-old daughter's hair. This is where worthless trash belongs, she exclaimed, dragging Sophie toward the door. Get your pathetic spawn out of our sight before I call security. Sophie started screaming and Eli started wailing. I ran toward my daughter, but Natalia shoved her hard, sending her stumbling towards the door. Don't you dare touch my children, I yelled, but my parents simply stood there, watching. She's right, Mom stated bitterly, her arms crossed. Take your disappointments and leave. We're done enabling your failures. Dad nodded in accord. You've made your choices, Rachel. Now live with the consequences. I cradled my wailing children in my arms, my own tears flowing freely. As I carried Sophie and held Eli's hand toward the door, I took one final look at my family. You'll regret this, I whispered gently. I promise you. You'll regret this. Natalia laughed. Right. What are you going to do, Rachel? Call the police? Sue us? You can't afford a lawyer, and everyone knows you're unstable. I did not respond. I simply went out the door with my kids, piled them into my car, and drove away. But as I drove out of the driveway, I made one phone call. Hello, Daniel. It's Rachel. I need to ask you about something important. Daniel was an ex-boyfriend from college. Not Jake, but someone I had a serious relationship with before him. We remained acquaintances throughout the years, and he had become a successful corporate lawyer. More significantly, he'd always had a crush on me and pledged to aid if I ever needed it. Rachel, good to hear from you. What's going on? I need to know about inheritance laws, I continued, attempting to keep my voice steady while Sophie and Eli sobbed in the back seat. Specifically, about grandparents' rights and family trusts. There was a pause. That's oddly specific. Is everything okay? Not really. Can you meet me tomorrow? I think I need a lawyer. Of course, Rachel. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out. The following morning, I sat in Daniel's office and told him everything. He listened uninterrupted, occasionally taking notes, his visage darkening with each detail. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce Daniel and explain why I trusted him with this scenario. We dated during my junior year of college, and it was serious. The kind of relationship where you start talking about marriage and having children, but life had different plans. Daniel was accepted to Harvard Law School, and I was battling to complete my pre-med courses while working 2 jobs to pay for school. The tension and distance eventually broke us up, but we remained friends. Daniel had developed a close relationship with my entire family over time. He had attended law school with my cousin Ryan, and they had remained close. When my parents needed estate planning advice, Ryan recommended Daniel. This made sense. Daniel focused on family trusts and estate planning, and my parents trusted him because of a family link. They had no notion about our romantic history, thinking of him only as Ryan's law school classmate who had achieved success. Daniel had a successful career in business law, focusing on family trusts and estate planning. He married his law school girlfriend, but they split amicably after learning they had different goals in life. He'd always been nice to me, checking in occasionally and offering assistance when he learned about my difficulties as a single mother. I had always been too proud to accept, but this time was different. So, let me get this straight, he remarked when I finished. Your parents promised college funds for all the grandchildren. Then your sister convinced them to give your kids money to her kids instead. And when you objected, they physically threw you out and your sister assaulted your daughter. That's exactly what happened. Daniel put his pen down and rubbed his temples. Rachel, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable, but I need you to hear me out completely before you react. I nodded, but my heart was already beating. About 6 months ago, your parents came to see me about setting up a family trust. They wanted to make sure their assets would be distributed fairly among all their grandchildren. My heart has stopped. What? They set up a trust specifically designating equal amounts for each grandchild. The college funds they mentioned, those weren't just promises. They were already legally established. Natalia can't just demand your kids' money because it's not your parents' money anymore. It's trust money, and I'm the trustee. The room began spinning. Are you saying? I'm saying your parents can't change the terms of the trust without going through me. and I have a legal obligation to ensure each child receives their designated amount. If they try to redirect funds, they'll be in violation of the trust agreement. But they seemed so sure they could just give Natalia more money. Daniel took out a hefty file from his desk drawer. That's because they probably forgot about the legal implications. People often think family trusts are just suggestions, but they're legally binding documents. Your parents would have to prove in court that your children are unfit beneficiaries, which would be nearly impossible. As he said, I recalled something. Daniel, my parents have always been forgetful about legal matters. Dad refuses to read contracts and Mom just signs whatever he tells her to. Is it possible they didn't understand what they were signing? Very possible, Daniel stated. When they came to me, they were focused on tax implications and making sure their assets were protected. They kept talking about fairness and equal treatment for all the grandchildren. Your mother specifically said she wanted to make sure no child felt less loved than the others. The irony was stunning. My parents had legally assured equal treatment for all of their grandchildren, but then promptly forgot about it and tried to pick favorites nonetheless. So, what does this mean? It means your kids are getting their college money whether Natalia likes it or not. But more importantly, it means we have grounds for a lawsuit. Your sister physically assaulted your daughter, and your parents were complicit. We can pursue charges for child abuse, assault, and emotional distress. I felt hope for the first time since the night before. Really? Really. And Rachel? There's something else. When your parents set up the trust, they also established a provision that if any adult family member physically harms a beneficiary, their own children forfeit their benefits. My jaw dropped open. What does that mean? It means that when Natalia grabbed Sophie by the hair and shoved her, she violated the trust agreement. Ava and Caleb just lost their college funds. I looked at him in bewilderment. How is that possible? Your parents insisted on that clause. They said they wanted to make sure the family stayed united and that no one would ever harm the children. Ironically, it was Natalia's idea. She said something about making sure you'd never do anything to hurt her kids. Daniel opened the file and retrieved the original trust documents. Here, look at this. Natalia's signature is right here next to the clause. The meeting notes from that day show she was very insistent about it. She said, he checked his notes, and I quote, "We need to make sure Rachel never does anything to hurt our children. She's always been unstable, and I don't trust her around Ava and Caleb." Reading those lines felt like a punch in the stomach. Natalia had planned to portray me as the dangerous one, untrustworthy among children, even 6 months earlier. She incorporated legal safeguards against me while never contemplating that she could be the one causing harm. She actually said I was unstable multiple times during that meeting. She also suggested that if you ever acted out or became violent, there should be consequences. Your parents weren't comfortable with targeting you specifically, so they made the clause apply to all adult family members, and now it's going to destroy her children's future. Daniel looked me in the eye. Rachel, listen to me carefully. Natalia did this to herself. She pushed on severe punishments for violence against children. Then she was violent towards a child. The trust is simply enforcing the rules that she demanded. I thought of Ava and Caleb, 2 innocent children ready to lose their college funds because their mother couldn't manage her temper. For a brief minute, I felt guilty. Almost. What about the kids? They don't deserve this. You're right, they don't. But their mother made a choice. She chose to assault your daughter rather than control her anger. She chose to prioritize her own desires over her children's future. These are the consequences of her actions, not yours. Daniel was correct, but it still felt heavy. So what do we do now? Now we go to war, Daniel declared, his eyes sparkling. We file charges against your sister for assault and child abuse. We pursue a civil suit against your parents for emotional distress and complicity, and we make sure the trust provisions are enforced to the letter. Over the next few days, I had to relive that horrific night several times. First for the police report, then for the district attorney's office, and finally for the Child Protective Services inquiry. Each time I had to narrate in detail how Natalia grabbed Sophie's hair, screamed about useless trash, and my parents stood by and watched. Sophie had to be interviewed by a child psychologist, and it shattered my heart. She couldn't understand why her aunt had hurt her, or why Grandma and Grandpa had been so nasty. Eli was too young to understand what had happened, but he kept asking when we'd see Grandma and Grandpa again. "They're in timeout," I informed him, which appeared to satisfy his 6-year-old thinking. The most difficult thing was explaining to both children why we wouldn't be coming to family dinners anymore. Sophie, being older and more alert, realized that something significant had occurred. She had stopped inquiring about meeting her relatives and had grown more attached, needing continual reassurance that I would not abandon her. "Mommy, are you going to get in trouble for what Aunt Natalia did?" she inquired one evening as I tucked her into bed. "No, baby, I'm not in trouble. Aunt Natalia is in trouble because she hurt you, and that's not okay. But Ava and Caleb didn't hurt me. Why can't I see them? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her aunt's actions have long-term effects for her cousins? How do you assist her understand that when grown-ups make poor decisions, innocent people suffer the consequences? Sometimes when grown-ups make bad choices, everyone in the family gets hurt," I stated gently. "It's not fair, but that's what happens." "Like when Daddy left?" The question took me off guard. Sophie rarely mentioned Jake, and when she did, it was usually to ask practical questions about why other kids had fathers while she didn't. "Yes, kinda like that. When Daddy left, it hurt all of us, not just me. But that wasn't our fault." "No, baby. It wasn't your fault or Eli's fault. Just like what happened with Aunt Natalia isn't Ava and Caleb's fault." Sophie remained silent for a long time. "I miss them," she confessed softly. "I know you do. I'm sorry this happened. Are you going to make sure Aunt Natalia doesn't hurt other kids?" The question surprised me with its maturity. "Yes, I am. That's why we're working with the lawyers and the police. We want to make sure no other children get hurt." "Good," Sophie said firmly. She was really scary. That conversation strengthened my resolve. This wasn't simply about vengeance and justice. It was about keeping children safe, including my own. Natalia had exposed her true colors, and I couldn't let her believe that her actions was okay. Meanwhile, I had been receiving calls from various family members. My Aunt Carol called multiple times, attempting to mediate the situation. My cousin Ryan had contacted out to see what he could do. Even several of my parents' friends had contacted me, shocked by what they'd heard. The tale was spreading across our extended family and social circle, and it did not depict Natalia or my parents in a positive manner. According to my Aunt Carol, Natalia had been calling family members to persuade them to drop the allegations against me. She was casting herself as the victim, alleging that I had overreacted and was destroying the family for nothing. She actually said it was nothing, I asked my aunt during one of our phone conversations. She said you were being dramatic and that she barely touched Sophie. She claims you've always been jealous of her success and that you're using this as an excuse to hurt her children. Her children are getting hurt because of her actions, not mine. I know that, Rachel. Most of the family knows that, but Natalia is desperate, and desperate people say desperate things. What are my parents saying? There was a pause. They're confused. They keep saying they don't understand how things got so out of hand. They claim they never meant for Sophie and Eli to lose their college funds. They didn't lose their college funds. Ava and Caleb lost theirs because Natalia assaulted Sophie. I know, honey, but your parents are having trouble accepting that their actions have consequences too. They keep saying they were just trying to be practical. Practical by calling my children disappointments and failures. They're claiming they never said that. They're saying you misunderstood their words. The gaslighting was predictable, but nonetheless frustrating. Even when faced with legal ramifications, my parents refused to accept their mistakes. Aunt Carol, I need you to understand something. This isn't about jealousy or family drama. Natalia physically assaulted my daughter while my parents watched and did nothing. Then they threw us out of their house and called my children worthless. There's no misunderstanding here. I believe you, Rachel. I hate seeing the family torn apart like this. The family was torn apart the moment Natalia decided to hurt Sophie. Everything that's happened since then has been consequences. How long will this take? The lawyer says probably about 3 months. Less if they try to settle. They'll try to settle. But Rachel, your parents are about to lose their golden child's college funds and face criminal charges. They'll do anything to make this go away quietly. But I was not interested in letting it go gently. This had been building for 34 years, and I'd had enough of protecting individuals who had never protected me or my children. The legal process progressed faster than I expected because to the clarity of the video footage and Natalia's indefensible behavior. Daniel had to file documents with the court to formally enforce the trust violation, which took around 6 weeks. During that time, we gathered evidence, recorded Sophie's trauma through therapy sessions, and put together our case. Daniel slumped back in his chair. Rachel, I need to tell you something. About 6 months ago, your parents came to see me about setting up a family trust. They wanted to make sure their assets would be distributed fairly among all their grandchildren. My heart has stopped. What? They set up a trust specifically designating equal amounts for each grandchild. The college funds they mentioned, those weren't just promises. They were already legally established. Natalia can't just demand your kids' money because it's not your parents' money anymore. It's trust money, and I'm the trustee. I looked at him in bewilderment. Are you saying? I'm saying your parents can't change the terms of the trust without going through me, and I have a legal obligation to ensure each child receives their designated amount. If they try to redirect funds, they'll be in violation of the trust agreement, but they seem so sure they could just give Natalia more money. Daniel smiled bitterly. That's because they probably forgot about the legal implications. People often think family trusts are just suggestions, but they're legally binding documents. Your parents would have to prove in court that your children are unfit beneficiaries, which would be nearly impossible. So what does this mean? It means your kids are getting their college money whether Natalia likes it or not. But more importantly, it means we have grounds for a lawsuit. Your sister physically assaulted your daughter, and your parents were complicit. We can pursue charges for child abuse, assault, and emotional distress. I felt hope for the first time since the night before. Really? Really. And Rachel? There's something else. When your parents set up the trust, they also established a provision that if any adult family member physically harms a beneficiary, their own children forfeit their benefits. My jaw dropped open. What does that mean? It means that when Natalia grabbed Sophie by the hair and shoved her, she violated the trust agreement. Ava and Caleb just lost their college funds. I couldn't believe what I heard. How is that possible? Your parents insisted on that clause. They said they wanted to make sure the family stayed united and that no one would ever harm the children. Ironically, it was Natalia's idea. She said something about making sure you'd never do anything to hurt her kids. The irony was nearly too perfect. Natalia insisted on a condition that would eventually damage her own children's future. So what do we do now? I inquired. Now we go to war, Daniel declared, his eyes sparkling. We file charges against your sister for assault and child abuse. We pursue a civil suit against your parents for emotional distress and complicity. And we make sure the trust provisions are enforced to the letter. How long will this take? With the evidence we have, your testimony, the children's statements, and the trust documents, probably about 3 months. Less if they try to settle. They'll try to settle. Rachel, your parents are about to lose their golden child's college funds and face criminal charges. They'll do anything to make this go away quietly. 3 weeks later, I arrived back to my parents' place, but this time, I was not alone. I was accompanied by Daniel, a process server, and a child protective services investigator. The expression on Natalia's face as she opened the door was priceless. Rachel, what are you doing here? I'm here to serve you with legal papers, I explained calmly. You're being charged with assault and child abuse. What? Natalia said, her voice harsh. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, I said. You physically assaulted my 8-year-old daughter. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? My parents appeared behind Natalia, their expressions paler. Rachel, what's going on? Mom inquired. What's going on is that you're all about to learn what happens when you mess with my children, I told you. Daniel? Daniel stepped forward, holding his briefcase. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, I'm Daniel Chen, representing your daughter, Rachel. I'm here to inform you that you're being served with papers for a civil lawsuit and to discuss some irregularities with a family trust you established. Dad's face turned white. Trust? What trust? The trust you set up 6 months ago designating college funds for all your grandchildren, Daniel conveyed easily. The one where you specifically requested provisions protecting the children from family members who might harm them. I observed their expressions change as they realized what was going on. They'd forgotten about the trust, exactly as Daniel had expected. Now wait just a minute, Dad murmured, attempting to regain control. We can work this out as a family. No, I replied firmly. We can't. You made your choice when you threw me and my children out. When you watched Natalia assault Sophie and did nothing to stop it. When you called my children disappointments and failures. Rachel, please, Mom pleaded, tears welling up. We can fix this. You're right, I replied. You can fix this. You can pay for the therapy my children are going to need after being traumatized by their own family. You can publicly apologize for your behavior, and you can explain to Natalia why her children no longer have college funds. What? Natalia exclaimed. What do you mean my children don't have college funds? Daniel opened his briefcase and took out a large document. According to the trust agreement you insisted on, any adult family member who physically harms a beneficiary forfeits their children's benefits. When you assaulted Sophie, Ava and Caleb lost their college money. Natalia's face changed hues, starting with white, then crimson, and finally sickening green. That's not possible. I never agreed to that. Actually, you did, Daniel replied, flipping over the pages. Here's your signature, right next to the clause you specifically requested. You said, I need to make sure Rachel never does anything to hurt our children. It never occurred to you that you might be the one causing harm. This is ridiculous, Natalia exclaimed. I barely touched her. You grabbed an 8-year-old by the hair and shoved her, Daniel remarked coldly. That's assault and it's on video. Video? Dad inquired softly. The security cameras you installed after the neighborhood break-ins, Daniel recalled. We subpoenaed the footage. Everything is recorded. Natalia assaulting Sophie, you two standing by and watching the verbal abuse, all of it. I watched as my family's world collapsed around them. Natalia was sobbing now, as the truth of what she'd done set in. My parents looked like they had aged 10 years in the last few minutes. What do you want from us? Mom inquired calmly. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, I told you. For 34 years, you've treated me like I was less than Natalia. You've made me feel like my children were worth less than hers. You've enabled her toxic behavior and made excuses for her cruelty. Rachel, Dad began. I'm not finished, I said. You want to know what I want? I want you to live with the knowledge that your favoritism destroyed this family. I want Natalia to explain to Ava and Caleb why they don't have college funds anymore. I want you to spend the rest of your lives wondering if you'll ever see Sophie and Eli again. Natalia gazed up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. Rachel, please, my children don't deserve this, they're innocent. You're absolutely right, I said. They are innocent. Just like Sophie and Eli were innocent when you called them brats and worthless trash. Just like they were innocent when you grabbed Sophie by the hair and shoved her out the door. I was angry, Natalia wailed. I didn't mean... You meant every word, I replied forcefully. You've always meant every cruel thing you've said about my children. The only difference is that this time there were consequences. Daniel moved ahead again. The charges have been filed. Natalia, you'll need to appear in court next month. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, you're being sued for emotional distress and complicity in child abuse. I'll be filing the necessary paperwork with the court to enforce the trust provisions regarding Ava and Caleb's forfeited benefits. What about visitation? Mom inquired frantically. We haven't seen the children since you called them disappointments and failures, I ended my sentence. Since you watched your daughter assault my child and did nothing. You gave up your right to see Sophie and Eli when you chose Natalia over them. They're our grandchildren, Dad objected. Then you should have acted like it, I told you. Grandparents protect their grandchildren. They don't enable abuse. As we were about to leave, Natalia grabbed my arm. Rachel, wait. We can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want. I looked down at her hand on my arm and then back up at her face. Natalia, for the first time in our lives, you're going to face real consequences for your actions. Your children are going to ask you why they don't have college funds, and you're going to have to tell them it's because you couldn't control your cruelty toward your own niece. Please, she whispered. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I explained, releasing my arm. You did this. You made this choice when you decided my children were worth less than yours. The legal case took 3 months to resolve. The security film was devastating, and Natalia's own remarks were captured plainly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she agreed to a plea agreement that included community service, anger management classes, and a 2-year restraining order prohibiting her from having contact with my children. My parents settled the civil suit out of court, agreeing to pay $50,000 for Sophie and Eli's therapy and other educational costs. The payment also included a formal written apology, which they refused to make public despite my lawyer's early requests. The most rewarding part was seeing Natalia struggle to explain to Ava and Caleb why they suddenly didn't have any college finances. Natalia originally sought to blame me, accusing me of stealing their money, according to my Aunt Carol, who remained in contact despite the family upheaval. But when the children spoke with their friends' parents, the truth came out. Ava, who was 10 and precocious, reportedly asked Natalia directly, "Mom, did you really injure cousin Sophie? Is this why we don't have money for college?" Natalia could not respond. The ripple effects lasted for months. Brian, who had been spineless throughout the ordeal, regained his courage and filed for divorce 6 months later. He was appalled by his wife's actions and couldn't reconcile it with the woman he had married. Natalia lost custody of the twins due to assault allegations and video proof. My parents' standing in the neighborhood was ruined. Dad had to retire from the country club board, while Mom was quietly requested to step down from her voluntary roles. The family, long regarded as community pillars, was now renowned for condoning child abuse. But the most poetic justice arrived 8 months later. Natalia, now divorced and in need of money, applied for a job at a medical clinic across town. She had no idea I worked at another clinic inside the same medical network. My supervisor contacted me as a professional reference throughout the usual background check procedure, because we had previously worked in the same field and lived in the same area. When asked if Natalia was suitable for a role dealing with families and children, I simply presented the facts. She has unresolved legal difficulties with child welfare and has been deemed inappropriate for roles involving youngsters. I gave them the court case numbers and suggested they verify the information through official procedures. 2 years later, my life has dramatically transformed. Sophie and Eli are doing well in therapy and have regained their trust, but they continue to wonder why Grandma and Grandpa no longer visit. I started seeing Daniel, who turned out to be everything I was looking for in a companion. We're taking it gradually, but Sophie and Eli adore him, and he treats them like they're his own children. I've also been promoted to office manager at the clinic, and with the settlement and trust funds, I was able to relocate us to a lovely 3-bedroom home in an excellent school district. Sophie participates in accelerated reading programs while Eli has joined the math team. They're both confident, happy kids who understand their worth. In contrast, Natalia continues to struggle. She lives in a small apartment, works part-time at a retail business, and visits her children every other weekend. Ava and Caleb are also in treatment, coping with the trauma of their parents' divorce and their mother's behavior. They have asked to see Sophie and Eli multiple times, but I have had to refuse due to the restraining order. My parents have tried to contact me several times, generally around holidays or the children's birthdays. They send cards and gifts, which I return unopened. They have asked other family members to step in, but I have made it obvious that my children and I are done with their toxic conduct. When my Aunt Carol last saw me, she told me that my parents had finally recognized they were wrong. They know they destroyed the family, she informed me. They know they chose Natalia over you and your children, and they regret it. Good, I replied simply. They should regret it. Don't you think it's time to forgive them? Questioned the woman. I thought about it for a bit. Aunt Carol, they watched their daughter assault my child and called my children disappointments and failures. They enabled decades of emotional abuse and favoritism. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about me and my children moving forward with our lives. But they're getting older, Rachel. They might not have much time left. Then they'll have to live with their choices, I said. Just like I've had to live with mine. The truth is that I don't think about revenge anymore. I achieved all I wished for. Justice for my children, accountability for Natalia's crimes, and a life free of harmful family relationships. Sophie and Eli will never have to doubt whether they are loved or cherished. They won't have to compete with cousins for their grandparents' devotion. They will never have to witness their mother being regarded as less than. Some people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Ava and Caleb. The answer is no. I feel sorry for them since they are innocent victims of their mother's brutality, but I do not feel guilty. Natalia chose to assault my child. She could have apologized, recognized her error, and made a different decision. Instead, she doubled down on her brutality and accepted the consequences. My children received a crucial lesson from this experience. Someone will always defend them. Others' opinions do not define their worth, and actions have repercussions. They also learned that family is more than just blood. It is about people who love and defend one another. Daniel has become our family. He'll file adoption papers next month, and Sophie and Eli will finally have a father figure who prioritizes their well-being. We're planning a small wedding for next spring, and my Aunt Carol will lead me down the aisle because my father gave up that right. Natalia, I heard through the grapevine, attempted to argue the trust judgment in court, claiming she was emotionally disturbed and not responsible for her behavior. The judge dismissed her case after watching the security footage. Apparently, seeing her grab a child by the hair and yell "worthless trash" made it evident that her actions were intentional and cruel. She's also claimed that I took her children's college funds, although most people know the truth by now. The odd thing is, I never desired vengeance. I simply wanted my children to be treated with the same affection and respect as their cousins. I wanted my family to regard Sophie and Eli as deserving of investment and care. When that did not happen, when my sister physically assaulted my daughter and my parents allowed it, I simply ensured that there were repercussions. I did not destroy my family. They wrecked themselves. I merely made sure they wouldn't destroy my children in the process. Looking back, I know that spending the night at my parents' house was the finest thing that could have happened to us. It prompted me to stop waiting for their approval and begin creating a life in which my children's worth was never questioned. Sophie and Eli learned that their mother will fight for them no matter what. And it taught all of us that sometimes the family you select is preferable to the family you are born into. Natalia received exactly what she deserved. A life without the support system she'd always taken for granted. Children who questioned her judgment, and the realization that her own harshness had cost her everything. My parents received precisely what they deserved. A shattered family, a tarnished image, and the knowledge that their favoritism had destroyed any possibility of a relationship with half of their grandkids. And I got precisely what I deserved. A life in which my children are cherished, safeguarded, and loved unconditionally. Where they won't have to question whether they're good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. They'll grow up knowing that someone is always fighting for them. The phone call I made that night was not about vengeance, it was about justice. And sometimes justice and vengeance look the same.